evening. This is John Warren, publisher of the San Diego Voice and Viewpoint newspaper, coming to you from the desk of the editor. Just like the song, we are indeed thankful for another week, another day. It's a time at which there are many things happening in the world and in our community, among our people, and yet we have to persevere and keep going. So we are honored that the Voice and Viewpoint, now moving in its 60th year, is able to be the voice for San Diego's African and African American communities. And we cover the news not from not black news, but from a black or Afrocentric perspective, because things always impact us a little differently. The late Maynard Jackson, the mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, used to say that when white America catches a cold, black America gets pneumonia, because our situation is always so much different. And so this evening we have a guest with us. We are honored to have Brother Hamid with us, who is president and founder of the Black Contractors Association, and most of us know him. He's a builder. And he's an activist, and he's built churches and homes, and now he's engaged in producing homes for veterans. And we know we have a housing shortage, and so he's in the restoration business. And we're going to talk about a battle that he's been fighting for at least 25 years that I know of, in terms of contracting in this great city and with the many people and companies here. So before we go to Brother Hamid, though, we want to just say a word about how important it is for us as a people to be informed and to pay attention to the things that are going on around us. We're now moving into the season where there's discussion about the census, and people will be coming around and looking for information. We have a president who wants to change the rules. He wants the census takers to require proof of birth and citizenship. And we know that when we move in that direction, we're going to lose count or number of people. We know that the influx of folks that we have, based on what's happening at our borders, are going to swell the households in certain communities. People are afraid of being identified. At the same time that we have this happening within the executive powers of the president, we also have states that are moving toward voter suppression, trying to deny the vote to ex-felons, even though people have paid their debt to society, changing the rules requiring state ID cards. And we know that people who are 60, 70, 80, and 90 years old, who have been voting since the Voting Rights Act passed, many of those people don't have copies of birth certificates, and we know yet they're citizens. And the whole plan here is to suppress the number of African American voters. We saw this done in Florida. We saw it done in Georgia in terms of Stacey Abrams' race. And so we know that if people are trying to turn back the clock, we saw a few years ago that the U.S. Supreme Court, which is now leaning heavily right, and even before it added 2 seats, it struck down provisions of the Voting Rights Act, which included the monitors who were sent into the various states to monitor voting practices in the South, so that we had a fair and equitable chance. We know that in states like South Carolina, the number of African Americans is great, and we see now, as candidates jockey for next year, we see people like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker going to South Carolina, while white candidates are going to Iowa. They're going south because they want to tap into that black vote there. So we have a lot to talk about, and I'm going to come back to some of it. I want to move the conversation to Brother Hamid. I want to give him an opportunity to say a couple of words about BCA, and he's homegrown here in terms of San Diego, here all his life, well known, and I think that we really have to bring attention to what's taking place in terms of the whole area of contracting. So, Brother Hamid, we're glad to have you with us. I want you to take a few moments to say hello, and we're going to get into some of the issues that are of concern to you.
Well, first of all, I want to give glory and honor to God, recognizing that we are on a Christian-based radio station, and this is very important to us. I represent the National Black Contractors Association that started out 37 plus years ago as the local black contractors. That organization has mushroomed into 17 chapters in 5 different states. And the premise of the organization is to keep the lion's share of opportunities for historically underutilized, underrepresented contractors of color, i.e. especially African Americans and the workforce. And so BCA has several models that are being modeled across the country. One, we have the only African American federal and state approved apprenticeship program in the country, which was awarded $1.5 million from the late, great Georgia Stevens to build a state-of-the-art 10,000 square foot training facility that is the national headquarters of the Black Contractors Association. We're using that same model to build in Jordan Downs, LA, working with the Watts CDC. So dealing with the imbalances that have been going on, we have basically prepared and readied our contractors. And we'll get into some of the barriers that have kept them out, such as bonding, some of the nepotism, the contractors electing and selecting to use their own and taking the lion's share, lawsuits that have been filed to do away with affirmative action and equal opportunity in contracting, the old 209 initiative, which was a duping of the masses that basically thought they were supporting a civil rights initiative when they were actually undoing affirmative action. So those are the things that we have been dealing with for a number of years, but at the same time, we have good news that we have grown contractors of color, or African American contractors, who are now mainstream and doing some big things. But we have so far to go.
Well, we know that there is building taking place. You go downtown and you see high-rises going up. We see people on jobs. One of the observations that you've made is that while you see people on jobs, they don't look like us. They're either white or Latino, and you've been struggling to help get people into the process. We know for perhaps the past 25 years, this has been a struggle here. 25 years ago, we had a situation where the Association of General Contractors had 100% of contracting business. And during the time of Reverend Stevens, we fought hard. I think we got up to 5% at one point. Right. They got mad and came back for 4% of that.
That's right.
Because they didn't want us to have it. We had a disparity study, which cost several $100,000. That didn't change things. We now have within the city a commission, an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and yet we don't get the kind of reports that we should get from the various departments and agencies in terms of hiring of people of color. And now we have an added problem that's taking place. We have so many people of Latino descent in the workplace and entering the workplace that now they're adding this requirement that you need to be bilingual to work on the site.
That's right.
So it's no longer a question that you got to be, that we don't want blacks, we want bilingual people. Right. And of course, 99% of African Americans are not bilingual in terms of speaking either Tagalog or Spanish.
Right.
And so that's working against us, I would imagine.
Well, you know, it's a shame, and you know, we applaud our Latino brothers for getting market share of the work that's out here in contracting and employment. But they have erected a wall, as you stated, Dr. Warren, that actually excludes people on the basis of non-Spanish speaking workforces. Many African Americans that I have put out and employed on projects that go on these jobs, they cannot communicate with the Latino workforce, Spanish-speaking workforces. And so, you know, the greed factor, when African Americans were the ones that paid the dues and sacrifice, you know, to make things happen for everyone, you know, we have partnered with our Latino brothers, and what's happening is that this term minority has been used to exclude as opposed to include. Because when contractors do their workforce utilization report and they say they have 90% minority, it's not 90% diversity. It's 90% one minority over the other. But we're not holding them accountable. The accountability has to be on our elected officials to make sure that there's parity and equality. One of the good things that took place today is that Dr. Sharon Whitehurst Payne made a house visit and had a conversation with the National Association of Black Contractors and its members. And her concern was to get more participation in her $80 billion school bond programs. And they're going to be renovating and retrofitting and building projects. So her passion is to say, how do we get more people involved?
Well, you know what? There's a saying that says the more things change, the more they remain the same. Or on the archives building in Washington, D.C., the inscription says, past is prologue. And when you talk about Dr. Payne, president of the school board, African-American member, having this discussion, 20 years ago, Dr. Bertha Pendleton was superintendent of schools, African-American, who had spent 40 years in the school system, I believe almost before she became superintendent. And one of the things that she did, and she insisted, and it was very successful, at least one Saturday a month over a period of months, there was a contracting fair at the main building of the school district out where the warehouses were.
Right, I remember that.
And in those days, if you came in and you could show that you were in business, you could walk out the door with a contract if it was up to, I think, like $15,000. There wasn't any pre-qualification and screening. You showed who you were, they showed what they needed to get done, and people walked out with contracts, and the contracts were broken down because in those days, one of the things they kept us out of the business of was the whole idea of bonds.
Right.
And most of us who were small business people could not afford the large bonds that they wanted us to have in order to get a job. So they knocked that out, broke the things down, people walked away with contracts, and when she left, the program left. So here we are now, 15 years later or 20 years later, talking about something as if it's never happened before, when it was done very successfully. And I would doubt that in addition to her being gone and 4 or 5 superintendents later, most of the people who were doing business then are gone, through attrition, have died off, or their businesses are gone. But it still doesn't stop the fact that we had done this before, and that it works, and that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. All we have to do is look at what's been successful. Could you speak to it?
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things regarding the bonding, it's a selection of the contractor's choice, prime contractors. You got Katz Excavating and Grading, who actually is a bondable contractor, doing many of the modernization programs with the Unified School District, one of the largest grading companies in San Diego. Started out with 2 pieces of iron. One of them was used to grade the building that the BCA is on. And now they're one of the biggest, by far, grading company that's African American. There's another gentleman by the name of Victor Ross, a block masonry contractor who has a union, is a union contractor, and contractors don't require him to bond. So it's by choice that they can choose and select and pick and choose. That's how they've grown the white, large subcontractors. They groom them by waiving the bond. John Warren gets a bond. He doesn't require everybody else to get a bond, so they come up like that way. So that's what's happening. And then there's other people. I want to talk too about people in the private sector industry. There's a brother that's over in Coronado building mansion. He's 36 years old, and he's one of San Diego's best kept secrets. He's worked on several mansions, $2 million renovation projects. The kind of guy that a Tyler Perry would call or Oprah Winfrey would call and say, I'd like to have this brother renovate or do my mansion. But bonding is one of the things that, one of the walls that have been built. The second wall that you just mentioned is being built today is Spanish-speaking workforces only. And what happens is when the city puts out the workforce utilization report, you look on those reports, there's 100 to 200 Latinos and no blacks or no women. And something's wrong with that. Our mayor, our city council has to recognize that there is a practice of exclusion of underrepresentation of workers and contracting.
Well, I don't think that they don't recognize it. Let me just pause for a moment and say that if you want to join our conversation, our number is 1-858-251-6111. 1-858-251-6111. Or you may go to godradio1.com. And if you want to join us on YouTube, you are able to likewise do that. So we're excited that we're streaming on Facebook with this discussion. And you can email us, you can make a call, you can come in and you can join on this conversation, and we'll be happy to have your input. There's a lot to cover here, and I want to point out something. Just a couple of days ago, I attended the annual Fair Housing Conference, and this was their 4th annual conference, and of course, there's some 17, 18 cities in San Diego County, the Federal Reserve, Housing Commission, all of these groups, developers have come together to create this entity, and supposedly it's looking at some demographics. It's looking at where the jobs are, where the movement is in terms of people. What does one need to live or survive in this community? Like one of the keynote presenters made the observation that, ironically, there are more people moving back to Mexico now than coming into the country. But the people that we're getting coming into the country are coming from South and Central America. So they kind of obscure that because they come up to Mexico and they come in from Tijuana. But they also made some observations like, how much do people need to live here? And I would say maybe 1 out of 10 jobs now and in the future outside of the bio or the technology industries would give people enough money to pay for a 1-bedroom apartment in San Diego.
Right.
And buying a home is another question in and of itself. So one of the things I'd like for you to just mention here briefly, you just completed a veteran's home, and I think it's a profound story. We covered it in the Voice and Viewpoint. You might say something about how many you've done, what you're doing, and that partnership arrangement, how that's working.
Well, you know, one of the things that we've been fortunate and blessed, the Association of Black Contractors have not solicited, donated land or anything of that nature, but folks have knocked on the door. Floyd Robinson donated 4 lots. We took those lots and we built up a ground-up new construction home that we sold to a veteran family, affordable veteran family. And what we did was use that project as an opportunity to incubate and train contractors and workers who are now in the industry. And the last project that we did, and we've done about 9 in my history of building. I was the framer of Bayview Baptist Church. I also built Christian Fellowship as a young 27-year-old. I did Black Horse and La Mirage out in La Jolla. So I had 150 workers working for me that I was training as tradesmen. But the partnership with the National Black Contractors Association allowed me to accredit them with an apprenticeship program that helped them to become journeyman carpenters, carpenters and then contractors. So the last house that we just built was a partnership with Jacob's Family Foundation, where they donated, they donated a house for $100. We went in and put $100,000 into it to bring it up to par, and sold it to a veteran family, you know, at a below market rate. And the proceeds that we took from the sales of that property went into developing some other properties. I just received a donation 2 months ago for another piece of land. And these properties, and that we're going to be building another veteran home, ground up veteran home. So we use these properties to create self-sustainability, and that's what we've been able to do.
Well, you might say a word, too, about how long it takes, okay? Because this is not like going in the store and buying a suit. I mean, they give you a piece of property, you've got permitting, you got contracting. How long did it take from donation to
From donation to completion, we put about 7 to 8 months because we had some barriers with the SDG&E routing and the gas and the sewer. The normal construction time is a 6 to 8 month time, you know, period. The acquisition of the land, the acquiring of the permitting, you know, that could be laborious, especially if you're doing new construction. The mayor has talked about streamlining. He's done a great job as far as making it easy for easier for the contractors to start to develop. But it takes a little time. But the harvest is great, because if you put 12 months into training, building, and developing, and then the following year you have a $200,000 to $300,000 profit margin, you know, say $100,000, $150,000 profit margin, then that gives you the seed money to start the next venture.
Well, we want to keep this thing live and on our minds. Most people in San Diego don't know that April is Fair Housing Month. And this is the 51st year of the Fair Housing Act, which was passed 50 years ago. And while we get excited about the government having passed fair housing, when we look very closely, we find out that the very government that is responsible for us having, for instance, the Fair Employment and Housing Commission in the state, that's the very entity responsible for all of this segregation and discrimination that we have,
and that's
just based on how they set the law up and
right.
who they gave the loans to and where they allowed people to build. And so, you know, we've been looking to an enemy for help that's really put us in a bind. Now we're in a situation where homelessness is increasing. I, for one, want to see a homeless services authorization in San Diego comparable to what they have in LA. I want to see a form of rent control in San Diego that's going to put some of the skids on landlords here who, according to the tenants union, and we've done stories on it, they're kicking people out who can not afford to pay rents. I had a person come to me Sunday in church and say that the place where they live in El Cajon, and they've been there for several years, and now they're on a month-to-month lease. People came to them a month ago and say, we want you out.
Wow.
And they said, why? They said, we don't have to give you a reason. You're month to month, all we have to do is give you 30-day notice.
That's right.
And then they're going to turn around and probably up the rent on that place by $800 or $900 in terms of what it costs. And there's another family looking for a place to live.
You know, it's criminal, and you're right, Dr. Warren. Right there at the National Association of Black Contractors office, homelessness had left downtown and are camping at our front doors. Malcolm X is being oversaturated with homelessness, and it's not getting any better. And so to put a Band-Aid on it and put someone in a shelter for a day or 30 days in a housing situation doesn't fit the bill. They have to create more single-family residents to convert them into SROs, where a person can afford $700 for a room. I've known families with 7 kids in a one-bedroom.
And I've known, and we saw it in National City, where rents jumped $500 and $600. The Latino families were telling the story of 3 families moving into a one-bedroom apartment so that the children could stay close to the school that they needed to be in. Black Men and Women United, which meets at the Voice and Viewpoint every Tuesday, over a year and a half ago, we adopted Bell Middle School because there were over some 70 kids identified as being homeless that were in that school that didn't have a home to go to at the end of the day. And so we put a food pantry there. We put in sports equipment. We worked with people to prepare backpacks for kids to take home on the weekend or to take with them in terms of wherever, because many of them were sleeping on the couches, or we've had mothers arrested or assaulted by San Diego police because in one case that comes to mind, the mother had the children sleeping in the car. She pitched a tent outside the car, and the cops came and cited her because the kids were sleeping in the car.
Wow.
So the inhumanity of this whole thing is phenomenal. And yet, if you go downtown in San Diego, you will see these new buildings, the lofts and everything, and they've got signs saying 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments, but the amount of rent for those apartments exceeds the average housing mortgage payment that people were making before the collapse.
Well, you know, one of the things I want to say, too, is that the crying shame is that in our community, there's a company called CORE. It's a non-profit, supposed to be affordable housing developer. Not one African-American on that job. That is blatant disrespect. And we've talked to these companies about getting more inclusion and participation. You know, I'm fed up with the idea of playing Santa Claus to the poor. You know, every year there are white philanthropists that give out turkeys and dinners and toys to the kids. I remember kids marking other kids for being on welfare, or your mama poor, your daddy poor. You know, hand out some jobs. Hand out some jobs so that we can feed and give our own kids toys and give our own kids turkeys. You know, I don't want to see no more white philanthropy coming into the neighborhoods or politicians giving out toys and giving out food to the poor on Christmas or a photo op. You know, this is a form of emasculation.
Well, the old proverb says, and we're going to go to a break for a moment, but the old proverb says it's better to teach a man to fish so he can feed himself for a lifetime than to give him a fish and let him eat for a day.
Amen.
And that's part of what we're dealing with. This is John Warren. I'm publisher of the San Diego Voice and Viewpoint, coming to you with our program from the desk of the editor this evening, inviting you to join us if you wish and to share your comments. We're talking about construction, housing. Brother Hamid with us this evening is not only, well, he's telling you that he's president of the National Black Contractors Association, but he's founder of the National Black Contractors Association, and he happens to be the president and founder of the Black Contractors Association of San Diego, located here on Imperial Avenue in southeastern San Diego. And so we're in a serious situation. The building of homes is not taking place as it was, or apartment units. The government is not making it attractive. Developers aren't going to do it if it doesn't work for them. Many of the people who find themselves in court, they're standing before judges who themselves are landlords, so you know they're not going to get any justice in that scenario. So you may reach us at 1-858-251-6111. 1-858-251-6111. This is John Warren from the desk of the editor.
Have you been in a car accident?
Good, man.
Bill collectors
You
hounding
got that
you?
radio voice.
About to
Doc.
lose your house?
You got that
your
radio
car?
voice.
Well, I
If
did
so,
this for like
you need to
10
contact
years
the
on the
offices of
NPR.
Odin and
Is that
Green,
right?
Yeah.
San Diego's oldest African-American law
Show
firm.
before.
Now, my
For
thing went off,
35
but it's
years,
still on
the
there, right?
offices
Yeah.
of Odin
Okay,
and
so I can pull
Green
up
have
later on
provided
and
quality
critique
legal
it.
services for the community.
And this stays
They
on.
pride
We,
themselves in
so
giving
far,
each and
because
every
then it said
client
we have even
individual
more people
attention.
because this
They
program
are
will stay
located
up
at
and people can
701
pull it
Main
up
Street,
from the app.
Suite
Are they
540
sending in
in
comments? Is that what
downtown
you're
San
getting?
Diego.
Well, we haven't had
Call them now
comments,
at 619
but we have
702
172 people.
0800.
175 that's been following us
619-702.
consistently throughout. The numbers go up
At
some.
Odin and Green,
And so
experience
that's, I
matters.
consider that a
Yeah,
Got
well,
Odin
that's
compliment.
in
been
there.
done.
Okay. You got Odin and Green in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Problems, saving, not
And we,
enough, taxes, too much,
throughout the week,
retirement, will it
the
happen?
views go to about
Investments,
5
which
to
ones are right
1,000.
for me? Insurance,
people
how will I
sharing it,
build my
and we
legacy?
look at the show.
And Allen Financial
Right.
Advisement.
So they're still looking
provides
at the show
solutions to
beyond
your
this.
problem.
And
Allen
is the
Financial
gala still
Advisement is a
up on
full
the
service
thing, or did that
financial
come
planning
down?
firm
No,
that
should
offers
be up there.
financial
Okay.
help
You're
just
saying?
where you need.
Our
it.
gala's
We can
still
help make
streaming.
this
Yeah, we just have
Allen
to,
Financial
we gotta do
Advisement
some kind
provides
of a
financial
directory to show
advice.
people what we
And we
have.
can actually pin it to
Get
the top where
answers
it's
by
always there,
calling
the first thing they
Area
see.
code
Oh, okay.
It's getting gooder and gooder every year, Dr.
964-309.
Well, thank
Or
you.
visiting us
It's
on the
getting
web
better,
at
right?
ALL.
We're gonna really
There's
take
a
it.
lot of work to do galas. We've done the last one we've done, my wife and I was talking about that. It's been about 4 years now.
AllenFinancialAdvisement.com. We offer
You
financial
just,
advice
we
with an
had-
educational
well,
emphasis.
I'm looking at
Securities and
something a little
investment
different.
advisory services
You know,
offered through
chatting to
Woodbury
you, talk to
Financial
them,
Services, Inc.
you know,
Member
summits,
FINRA,
you know, those kind of things.
SIPC,
And just going after
and
straight
registered
membership.
investment
Well, you know,
advisor.
I've
Allen
done,
Financial
we were the
Advisement
first ones to
and
take the
Woodbury
community to
Financial
Torrey
Services,
Pines.
Inc. are now
Right.
Yeah, and they didn't want us to come play, and I reminded them that they were a public golf course.
Right.
And then we would either play or they were closed, so,
Yeah.
This year's
They got
theme
used
is
to
the
us
Wonderful
coming.
Wizard of Oz.
And I don't play
it will
golf.
be
Yeah.
Oz.
you know, I used to
As
just
we
go up there and
celebrate the
say
15th
good morning to the
Annual
people and get them
Festival,
off.
an all-day
That's right.
celebration
Come back
of
at
great
lunchtime.
gospel
That was, you know,
music
you
on
mentioned you
5
brought the
different
Gold Coast
stages.
Classic. I still got those
choirs,
plaques
and
on my
quartets
wall.
to dance,
Yeah.
spoken word,
That
and
was-
hip hop. Your spirit
It
will
was
be
something
uplifted
that,
with the Toyota
you know,
Concert
see, those
Series
things gotta
headliners.
be.
The incomparable legendary Clark sisters.
I got all kinds of film littered, and I gotta figure out who we get to go through it and put it all together. We got the step shows already. That's what I keep forgetting
With the
about.
legendary Clark sisters. And
Is
the
she still
Law
doing
School.
that?
For more information, go to sdfairs.com.
Okay.
Save the date and be there because it
We ended
will
up
be
doing this whole program
awesome.
on this, because I want you to talk more about what the city is not doing with you in terms of notice.
Okay.
Okay. This again, John Warren, publisher of the San Diego Voice and Viewpoint newspaper, coming to you with the slogan that a people without a voice cannot be heard. And so we are here to be that voice. This evening, our program is called From the Desk of the Editor, and this is an opportunity to talk about the issues and concerns that we face not only here in this community, but nationally. And in the latter part of this program, we're going to talk about some of these national issues before we go this evening, because if we don't keep them in front of us, we won't know about them, and other people won't bring them up. Most of us might watch CNN, but we probably have more people looking at entertainment tonight than the local news, wondering what the stars are doing when we're the ones suffering while they're going to the bank. If you wish to join us, our number is 1-858-251-6111. Our guest this evening is Brother Hamid of the Black Contractors Association. We've been discussing some of the issues in contracting. We're going to switch gears a little bit and really get more into what's happening with the city of San Diego, because the city has got a lot of money for projects, and all of these projects are not necessarily putting buildings up, street repairs, and in all the areas that they should be hiring people, we're not getting the jobs. And Brother Hamid, we've talked about this. You know, some 55 years ago, when I was in high school, we were sold a bad bill of goods. In those days, we had a track system, at least in Washington, D.C. and in some other cities. And one was college prep, and one was those that might go to college, and the third one were those who were going to go out and get a job, probably something simple. But the fourth track was even in a separate school. That was vocational education. And that was training people to be bricklayers, plumbers, carpenters, auto repair. And everybody was looking down their nose at them while they were trying to learn Shakespeare. And really, Shakespeare wasn't going to give them a job at the end of the rainbow. We come fast track down the road, and what's happened? All of the whites have gone into the trades. They've co-opted the unions. They control the unions. We're the ones left on the outside. They're the ones with the skills that are transferable to whatever city or country, wherever they go. There's going to be a need for a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter. These are real skills that are out there. So, Brother Hamid, I'm not sure where we are in terms of our school system even addressing that component, because your apprenticeship program has not received the kind of support that it should. But can you say something about what you're getting from the city? Because I know this city plays to the AGC as much as it possibly can, the Association of General Contractors.
You know, since Proposition 209, the city of San Diego has been under siege by the AGC, Associated General Contractors of America, who are business, and they are basically trying to get away with, or putting out, stopping anything that's going to have a mandate that's going to have preferential treatment for so-called minorities, when they have 90% of the work already, but they want to take away those preferences. The construction industry pays very well. The ditch diggers that you see in the streets of the city of San Diego working for contractors are getting $63 an hour. And so in order to live in San Diego, that's $7,000, $8,000 a month. A person can afford to live in a home and pay for a home in San Diego making that kind of money. Those workforce utilization reports that we asked the city to pull, and Councilwoman Montgomery is auditing these companies, and there's 5 of them that have been given no-bid contracts under the MOC program. And there's going to be, on the 18th, a so-called job outreach program when we shut down Orion's construction site on December the 28th and held them down for 4 hours until they said, yes, we're going to hire people from the community. We're going to hire 35%. They have had 3 African Americans on hold that were qualified. I just had a conversation with the owner, Mark, yesterday, and he says, you know, I did promise this, you know, but the city's not giving me no more work. I got people sitting at home. I said, Mark, you got contractors and subcontractors that you could work folks on. So the problem is this, is that as long as we're making noise, as long as we're putting pressure on the powers to be, people are responsive and responding. Our challenge is this: we're establishing capacity building among African American contractors who can compete and hire our own people, hire our own community, and to continue to grow. But at the same time, there is an obligation for the city to make sure that everyone that is a taxpayer, as the mayor so eloquently put in his State of the Union address, he wants to see projects in the community reflect the people from the community.
Well, you know, I want to, as you were talking, I want to point out something. One of the things I've noticed from being a publisher in this community now over 35, 30 years, is that so many times when we talk about things, people are interested and they want to follow, but they don't understand how they work. And so when they don't understand the background, then we kind of lose them because most people won't just stand up and say, I don't know.
Right.
And so as you were talking, one of the things that I wanted to help point out to people is how the contracting process works. I remember many years ago, I went to a law school that specialized in government contracts. And I created the first government contracts course that they had and taught it at National University. And one of the things people don't understand is when you see a project going up, the general contractor is the person who has taken all of the subcontracts that are going to be involved in putting that building together. So they've gotten with the architect, they've looked at how much sheetrock is going to require, how much carpentry in terms of the windows and the rooms and all of those things.
Right.
And then they've put out a bid requirement to people who do those services. Bid requirements for the electricians that have to do the wiring of the building.
That's right.
Bid requirements for the plumbers that have to come in from the foundation, bring the pipes up for the toilets and run them in the walls. And so they have to not only put together bids from people who do those specialties, they got to know how many people, how much they're going to pay them.
That's right.
They got to know the insurance that's involved. They got to have the cost of the materials to make sure that they're not being robbed or wrong stuff done, because that's why we have inspectors that go in to look at the strength, look at the wiring. When the wiring is done, the outlets have to be certain space apart.
Right.
All of this goes into it. So when a general contractor says, well, gee whiz, I would hire somebody, but I don't have any work right now, you have to say that's bogus. Because you've got a whole cadre of subcontractors who, whenever you do put a bid out, they're going to put a bid in with you for some part of that work.
That's right.
And you can control whether or not those people have a workforce that reflects the policy expectations of you as a general contractor. Now,
Dr. Warren, I got to interject for a minute. You just blew me away because you talked about all the nuances of building, and the average person doesn't understand that when you're talking about building structures and infrastructure and everything that has to go with it. I have to applaud you on that. I was just impressed as a so-called non-builder that, you've given that analogy.
Well, one of the things is as you get older, you get a little bit even by osmosis. But I've just always been concerned with what happens with us with unions, okay?
Right.
And remember, in the days that I worked for Adam Clayton Powell in Education and Labor, part of the committee was education, part of the committee was labor. And Powell was a friend of labor. And labor, we dealt with things like Hospital Construction Act or Fair Labor Standards, amendments to the Fair Labor Standards, or when the coal mines collapsed in Pennsylvania and people were dying and the United Coal Miners were trying to get a black lung, a formal name pneumocomiosis, passed so that there could be benefits for those people who weren't getting them. And so I grew up watching and being in on all of this, and at the Rainbow, there are people who are just trying to survive, whether they're working in West Virginia or they're working in tobacco in the South. It's about survival. And we have people who are greedy. They just want to control all of it. I had a newspaper in Florida for over some 15 years. And when you drive through Florida and you see the orange groves and you see Donald Duck, which is the owner's not far from the place that we were. We're in the same county down there. This guy has gotten rich not because he owns all the land that he grows those orchards on. The land is owned by the federal government.
Wow.
He leases the land for like 50 years at a time for maybe $10 or whatever, some crazy amount. And he has free use without paying taxes.
Wow.
And so if that's not welfare, tell me what is.
Well, that's one of the things that you talked about, touched on. You said something about trade unions and the imbalance of the trade unions, which, has always been a fight for 50 years through the civil rights movement, is to get more African Americans into the building trade unions. Unions have always been nepotism. If it's an Irish police department, it's all Irish. If it's a Italian fire department, it's all Italians. A lot of the labor trades in California is Latinos, and they dominate with Latinos, and they basically set language up as a barrier. And so what's happening with the city of San Diego City Schools, they have a project stabilization agreement. And that project stabilization agreement has targeted zip code hiring to specifically hire underrepresented residents from inner cities and urban America. It hasn't worked very well because even though it's a project stabilization agreement that says union exclusivity or the monopoly of union-only workers, where the unions are the cash cow for the Democratic Party, the working poor. They elect and support Democratic candidates who make policies and procedures, whereas the business community, which is the Associated General Contractors of America, they represent business, and they're pushing back on preferential treatment, Davis-Bacon wages, and anything else that will help create capital opportunities and equality. So there's a whole lot of things that has to be dealt with. So the National Association of Black Contractors is dealing with this in Los Angeles, on Skid Row. We're in Jordan Downs. We're working with Omar Sharif in Chicago, who is in a partnership with Rainbow Push, you know, and they're working to tear down the walls there. So is with McCutcheon in the Carolinas. So our national platform, if I may speak just shortly on that, is to basically bring out best practices and to create alliances. But we're dealing with millennials now, and they have a different strategy, and we want to support them so that we do have parity and we don't sing the song of being excluded. Lastly, I want to say that we've written a book has been written called Black Carpenter's Guide. And the Black Carpenter's Guide is a book that tells African Americans, young folks, about the right mindset and how to make it in the construction industry. Yeah, racism is going to exist. You're going to see swastikas. You're going to see a whole lot of things. And you're going to be, there's a whole lot of things that take place. The challenge that this book gives us to do is to be the best that we can be, and to be as our ancestors, the great builders of ancient civilization, Mogadishu, Botswana, and all the other places that we've built in the history of man.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because, you know, a lot of people don't know when you walk around and you look at monuments, you look at the nation's capital, it was black people that built that dome and to put that statue on top of it.
That's right.
Okay. It was Benjamin Banneker who laid out Washington, D.C. In terms of the streets and how it should be designed and all of those things. We have a message in from John Blake who says, please mention again the dates of your business gathering. And I'm sure you can, whether it's Chat and Chew or the meeting that's coming up that you said on the 18th, which the city has not bothered to advertise with us,
Right.
even though they have an obligation in terms of due process to do so. There's nothing been done.
Well, the National Black Contractors Association, you can contact us at nationalbca at AOL.com, nationalbca@AOL.com to follow our different galas, different monthly Chat and Chews, and it's usually the third Wednesday of every month at 12 o'clock noon at the National Association of Black Contractors, 6125 Imperial Avenue, which is our national headquarters and meeting gathering place. And we'll talk about who's coming next. We'll be having presentations from the Councilwoman Montgomery, as well as Mayor Faulkner and others that are the deciders that can make decisions and change policies and procedures to make greater inclusion.
I want to point out two things here. I think, first of all, we want to applaud Councilwoman Monica Montgomery, who happens to be an attorney as well, and she comes from construction.
Civil
Her
rights
family's
as well.
been in construction. But one of the things she's done is she's made sure that as she looks at the numbers in terms of how people are being hired, if she doesn't see the diversity that should be there, then she's moving in the direction of calling for the audit, which gives some insight into how things are working. This is what I need the community to understand, because some people are listening to us and you're saying, oh, well, you know, this conversation doesn't concern me. You know, I got my house, my grandkids, I got my retirement, I'm in the drop, I got all of these things going. But yes, you are involved. You're involved one way or other. You're either involved directly or indirectly. If you don't believe you can be involved indirectly, just go back in the news the past couple of weeks and look at how many home invasions we've had.
That's right.
And the age of some of the people who have been the victims of the home invasions. I'm sure they thought they wouldn't be bothered either, that life was good and safe. We have a homeless crisis here, if we're not addressing it in the manner that we should, we're putting rubber bands on it, we got people in Golden Hall, we're asking the perpetrators, it's like having a fox guard the hen house.
That's right.
And determine how many hens are gonna stay in there while he's having chicken every day. So we've got to pay attention to this issue. That meeting that was just held, on Thursday of last week, the Fair Housing Regional Alliance Conference, they weren't just looking at the housing that exists now, but those people came together from all of those municipal areas to look at what kind of jobs are going to be needed here.
Right.
The Federal Reserve out of San Francisco was here to look at that to see, well, what's the money going to be? Developers need to know, is it going to be worthwhile to put money in here? And I keep raising the issue, as I raised a week ago, where we had representatives of the Housing Federation as well as the San Diego Tenant Union. I keep raising the issue of how much it costs to live in San Diego today. Landlords are asking people for proof that they have incomes that are at least 3 times whatever they're asking for in terms of rents. And if they're asking for $1,700 for a 1-bedroom apartment, most rank and file people are not making 3 times that a month, or they're working 2 jobs or more just trying to survive. Transportation is not what it should be here. I hope the fact that Georgette Gomez, in addition to being president of the city council, is a member of the Metropolitan Transit Board and SANDAG, that in those positions, something will be done to upgrade public transportation. San Diego is no longer a little sleepy town where a bus or a trolley service should stop at midnight when people are working night shifts around the clock and then they can't get around. The answer is not all of the Uber and cab services, because the cost of taxis is prohibitive. The cabs are struggling to survive against Uber and Lyft. And so we have unidentified, undiscussed issues here. And I do hope that we can keep the spotlight on what you're doing. Maybe you can give us, in a couple of words here, some things that we can do in the community to help you get the attention and the focus that must be brought to make what you're doing successful right now.
Well, you know, one of the things I want to say that we have, as a people, we have an obligation to hire ourselves first. We have been getting several calls from African Americans who are looking to do home improvement projects and renovation, and we vet out contractors. You know, we have this stigma that if an African American does something wrong, you don't want to fool with no African Americans, or we say the N-word. You know, but if they're wrong by a Latino company or a white company, they'll say, don't deal with John Block anymore, John Bill. So I think in building our churches and doing, creating self-help is a very big part of it. Also, Lynn, come down to the National Association of Black Contractors, talk to some of the apprentices that are going to school, and find out how you can get involved, because this is about economic empowerment. This is not just civil rights, this is silver rights.
I'd like that, yes. And civil rights, that was the term that we used when my late wife, Jerry Warren, created the San Diego County Black Chamber. The emphasis was on civil rights, right, not just civil rights. And so I believe that we can impact civil rights if we start thinking about how we spend. I applaud you for your work with Black Men United. Many people don't know that Brother Hamid is one of the founding members, some 17 years ago now,
yeah.
Black Men United when we first started, and now we have expanded to be Black Men and Women United, still meeting every Tuesday at 8 a.m. at the San Diego Voice and Viewpoint offices, still looking at issues in our community, looking at how we can help one another. We're not competing with one another. We're not a nonprofit. We're not a structured organization. We have no bank accounts, so there's nobody that can give money or take money. But we're there to help each other to the extent that we can. And most people don't realize that the Black Men United here in San Diego is the prototype of the Black Men United entities that you find on the internet. They were all created after we created this one, and they followed our role model in terms of involvement and participation. And so we're appreciative of you being with us, Brother Hamid. The meeting that's going to take place next week that the city is holding on the 18th, is there anything that the community can do in terms of that meeting?
You know, I think what the city has, what this community need to do, I felt like that meeting was a slight to the Black Contractors Association, the Voice and Viewpoint, and other stakeholders. It's a way the city has whitewashed and have set up a dog and pony show to say that they've made good faith efforts with these offenders who have poor records of participation. What was supposed to take place was a summit, a dialogue, sitting down with Black Men United and other stakeholders, the National Association of Black Contractors, with these awardees to say, look, these are the policies, this is what we need to do to change the paradigm. We're looking at your workforce reports based on the Montgomery audit, and we see that you have not used women. Women make up 50% of the population. You have 200 workers, you don't have one female. They're heads of household, they're no longer stay-at-home moms. They need to feed their families. Same with African Americans. So I think that what we have to do is we have to continue to impress upon our political leaders to have meaningful programs and basically what's happening. But I'm not discouraging. If there's young people that want to go out there and apply for jobs, get some of those $63 an hour jobs that are going to be supposed to be available. We need to have a database collected to make sure that these people don't just sign up and then their names get put in the trash when the dog and pony show is over. That's what's important. We've got to keep a mindful and watchful eye on this.
Well, we want to thank you for being here with us. I need to take the last few minutes that we have, if you don't mind, hanging in here and just bring some things to our attention which are very important. April is not only Fair Housing Month, which we see people talking about, but April happens to also be Minority Health Month. And at the end of this month, the Voice and Viewpoint is going to publish a special issue on the state of African American and Black health. And we're going to be looking at it across the board because we have so many things happening. We have like 3 illnesses the county would tell us that are responsible for 50% of our deaths. Obesity, high blood pressure, heart attacks, cancer. All of these things are connected into lifestyle. We are spending dollars on cigarettes and fast foods and candy and potato chips. Easter, quote unquote, is coming and we're running out buying chocolate bunnies and candy, and all of the stuff that's being pumped into us is working against our health. And so we want to talk about it and get your attention. I believe in the next week or so, in the next 2 weeks, we're going to have another roundtable forum at the Voice and Viewpoint where we will continue this discussion. But we have articles we're running each week in the paper concerning health. And we want you to pick up a copy of this week's Voice and Viewpoint. It'll be available